So my talk today is going to be about evidence-centered design at SRI, the first decade. And when I wrote this title, I want you to know I wrote it with great optimism that there's going to be a second decade and a third decade and a fourth decade. So let's begin. I want to thank the nominating committee. I want to thank all the fellows who came before. I want to thank the org directors, 654, 653, 650, 656, for all of their support over these years. It's been wonderful. They've done a great job of supporting the assessment work. And I want to thank the assessment team, many of whom are in the audience here, but we'll get back to a picture of all of you shortly. So the other thing I want to do before we go any further is I want to call out two members, two external guests who are here, who really made a huge difference for me in learning what it means to be a director of an assessment group. One of them is right here, Edis Qualmaltz. Edis was the former director of assessment for our group, so thank you, Edis, for coming. And the second one is right here, Terry Vendlinski. Terry was the co-director with me in the assessment group just last year, and Terry taught me an enormous amount. So Terry, thank you for coming too. Okay, so this is a slide I always use when I start out talking about large-scale assessment. I do it for a very important reason. I want everyone in the audience just to get the sense of this is the way testing is going on. This looks paper pencil. There's a lot more technology today, but it's a standardized activity. I'm trying to capture that tone a little bit with this picture. It's a standardized activity. All U.S. students are very much engaged in what's going on in assessment, and along with everything else, it's a very volatile, in the news kind of area. So take a quick look, scan down this list. These are headlines that came out of the 2015 New York Times. We only took about 10% of the headlines we could have. So there are just numerous headlines, and you can see the challenges and the different types of reactions that people have in the world of assessment. So we're going to try to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what our work in evidence-centered design has meant against this backdrop. So I want to remind all of you that when you're listening to the presentation, you have to realize that assessment really is a linchpin to educational reform. It's really at the heart of what goes on in our schools. And it has the advantage of, if it is well done, we can hope that certain kinds of changes and improvements in education might go on. So I want to think for a moment with you about this quote. So this is a quote from Brookings Institute 2012. So it's a couple of years old, and I'm going to update it for you. But 45 states spend a combination of $669 million per year on the primary assessment contracts, about $27 per pupil in grades 3 through 9. And this amount of money is split among 6 testing vendors primarily. There's a few more, but basically 6. So if we adjust it, you can see the adjustment here, and that is even a little bit behind. In fact, it's now closer to $34 per pupil, and in fact, closer to $2 billion in terms of the contracts per year. And many people, when we present this kind of information, will say, oh my goodness, look at the amount of money that's going into testing in the United States. However, I want you to put it into a context, which is that in the United States per year, $600 billion per year for education overall. So testing is but a drop in that bucket, okay? So these are Brookings Institute kinds of background. Now, this is an interesting picture of this little girl who is thinking, obviously, about what she's doing, and I'm pretending that's an assessment up there, and she's giving this some concerned thought. But what is it exactly that SRI is doing to try to improve assessment in the world? And what we are doing is trying to move it from a more artful kind of activity to something that's more scientific. And there are a number of organizations and different activities that are going on to do that. But we really, that is part of the hallmark of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it a more scientific enterprise. And so how do we do it? 3 ways, basically. we design assessments, and you're going to make a distinction, guys, between design and development. Design is really what many people in this group do, technical specifications of what an assessment will look like, but also we do some development of items. The actual prototype items, and later on in the presentation we're going to show you one of our newest items that we're working on that's technology enhanced. So you'll have a chance to see what our item development work looks like. And we also are now just beginning with some work we're doing with Jeremy to think about developing workspaces for assessment. So not only are we developing items, but also a workspace where a student goes in and has a number of tools and a number of mechanisms they can use to answer questions, and they're technology enhanced. So we're going to talk about those. And then going back to Bill's comments when he was introducing us, what we have strived for is to be able to assess hard to assess content. And for us here at SRI, that often means STEM-related content. It could mean science, it could mean math, it could mean engineering, it could mean technology. But that doesn't mean we never do literacy, but we want to focus, and we have focused intensely around STEM. And also, with our colleagues in Org 653, we're also we're doing a lot of work with students with disabilities. We're starting to work more with English language learners, so hard to assess populations on hard to assess content. Those have been two of the areas that we try to work with. Okay, so that is the logo for the initial evidence-centered design project that was called PADDY, and this is where I have to recognize the extraordinary contributions of Robert Mislevy at ETS and our work with him when he was at the University of Maryland. PADDY was the first of our big ECD projects. It was about $6 million. It ran over almost 7 years. And the product of PADDY was an online assessment design system. And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. But let me talk for a moment about ECD. You know, evidence-centered design in assessment. What does it actually mean? What are we doing when we're doing evidence-centered design? So I'm going to give you a couple of adjectives that I like to use when I talk about it. It's a systematic approach, it's a disciplined approach, and what you're doing is you're trying to instill validity into the process of creating items and eventually producing the test overall. So you'll see later on, as we go through the different stages of work, how we try to make that, how we try to infuse that validity in the process throughout. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I want to talk for a moment about the actual products that we actually create and tell you that PADDY is an online assessment design system. It is not an authoring system. I have to make that distinction for people all the time. You don't write items in the PADDY tool. You actually are designing what is going to, the parameters for what your assessment will do. And what it involves, and I'm going to show you in a minute, is a layered series of templates. So these are really content ontologies that people who are working on the assessment use as they develop the assessment work. And so PADDY is a series of templates that are filled in by assessment designers as they move forward in their work. And it's driven by what we call an assessment argument. And when you think about what an assessment argument is, just think about 3 fundamental questions. For the assessment people that are in the audience, this is the kind of work that Sam Messick did. And it really is about what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we want to assess? What kinds of observations do we need to make to get evidence of these capabilities? And then what are the features of the tasks, the actual items and tasks that must be there to elicit that kind of response? So that is what the assessment argument is. And we're going to be thinking about that as we go through, as we move forward. Okay, so this is a very familiar diagram to people who work in assessment. This is what we use. We call it the layers. And really all it's showing you are layers of work, kinds of work that are going on during the assessment activity when you're actually designing. And that top layer, you know, says domain analysis. And I want to address this to the people in the audience that are chemists like Mark, people who are physics experts and so on. This is the propositional knowledge that exists in your discipline. So it could be in mathematics, it could be in physics, it can be any of the areas. You start out and you organize that knowledge. That knowledge has to be you have to decide what it is that's important for you, what things you're going to look at, what things are less concerning. Then you move down to the next layer of work. And the next layer of work we call domain modeling. And for those of you that have been around SRI, you'll know that is what we talk about as a design pattern. And the design pattern is a design document. We'll show you one. And it is really written at a prose level so that it doesn't matter whether Mark is reading it in chemistry or I'm reading it or we have a methodologist reading it with us. All of us can use it because we're not going to use highly technical language at that point. So the design pattern sets out some basic ideas. It identifies what we're going to assess. It identifies the observations that we're interested in looking for, and then it's going to start to talk about the features of the tasks. So the design pattern, high level, abstract, and it's the initial move from propositional knowledge in the discipline to the actual form of what an assessment will be. We're moving towards what the student is going to have to do. Okay, then we go down to the conceptual assessment framework. This is truly the realm of the methodologists in the room, and we have a couple of very high-quality methodologists here with us today. And what is happening at this level is the psychometric information that is really critical to the test is beginning to be infused. So we begin to talk about a measurement model. We begin to talk about rules of evidence, and we're going to specify these things in detail. This, too, is a design document. So when you're thinking about what we do, think about two basic documents. A design pattern, which is high level. It may be 5 or 6 pages in length. It may be 3 pages. It may only be 1 page. And a task template, which comes out of the conceptual assessment framework. And those documents can be very, very extensive and very detailed. Now, I'll just tell you that for the work we did for the national assessment, some of those documents range from 20 to 40 pages of detail. So they are highly, highly specified about what needs to go into the assessment. And then we go to assessment implementation. You're all familiar with that. That's the item writer. That's the person actually writing the items and getting everything ready to go. And then the assessment delivery, how that information is going to be put forward to the child or the student. Are they going to do it on a technology-based kind of platform? Are they going to do it paper pencil? Are we going to do it as an interview? So we have all these possibilities, and we're going to think through what we do. All of this work is at the design level. This is not to say we're delivering the assessment. We're not necessarily writing the items. We're giving specifications as we go to make this as valid an assessment as we can. So I want to show you a couple of products that we actually do, that we are paid to do by clients. So I want to make sure you see that that's part of what we do. This is what we call, this one. This is what we call the wind chime, and for an obvious reason. But the important thing about the wind chime, this happens to be the wind chime for the National Assessment Science. And I know you can't read all the little blocks, but I just want to give you the overview of what happens. At the very top, there's a capstone design pattern, which in this case happens to be about inquiry, because this is where the National Assessment was thinking about what an inquiry scale might look like. So we have a capstone at the top, which is the basic ideas that we're going to assess. We drop down to that next level. It says design pattern. So this is where the assessment designers now begin the process of trying to articulate in prose what is going to be assessed. Then, and that design pattern level actually is broken apart. So you have physical science, you have earth and space, and you have the life sciences. So there's 3 sets of design patterns that are created there. And then those spawn even more detailed task templates. And what was physical science more generally now begins to become force and motion. It begins to become more specified with the evidence interacting very closely with the science content. And then finally, at that last level, you see the items being created. And that's what we present to the National Assessment as an opening document it lays out the assessment system that we're going to work with, and we present that. Okay, then we go to a design pattern. So now what you're seeing, for those of you who may have heard about PADI but never actually seen the interface, this is in the browser from PADI, and this is the design template that an individual is completing as they're going forward. This is what the assessment designer is working with. And yes, see, if you want to point to the navigation bar, up on the top, there's a navigation bar that's made up of a set of layers, tabs. And those all are associated with particular aspects of the evidence-centered design process. So they include things like a student model, an evidence model, a task model. And those are sitting there, and people move in and out of these tabs as they are actually designing the assessment. On the left-hand side are all the key attributes that we think about with a design pattern. What are the focal knowledge, skills, and abilities? We're interested in knowing what observations might be potentially useful. And then finally, what are the features of the tasks? So this is the prose document that begins the process. We often call this PADI light. It doesn't look light, but it is light compared to where we're going. Okay. And then we go to the task template. And again, I know you can't read all this, but we're just trying to give you an overview at this point of what's involved. The task template is a much more elaborated kind of activity. It has much more integration, in this case, of inquiry and science knowledge in it. And we go through and we begin to elaborate, again, what we call the student model, what we're going to assess. But the important point here is that these individuals, called psychometricians, now come into the room and begin to say to us, what are the rules of evidence? What are the rules of evidence that we need? What is the measurement model? And this document then becomes far more laced with actual numbers, reliability estimates, all kinds of things that we're going to be striving for. So in the task template, it's a much more detailed, extensive treatment. So both of those things, the design pattern and the task template, are design documents that we produce. And this is my little cartoon. I use this just because I want people to get the big picture overall. So you see the wind chime at the top. We lay out the overall assessment system. We drop down to design patterns, and then we drop down into the task templates. Not always, not everybody wants a task template. That's a big investment of money to do that. And then we go to an item writer, and eventually we get an item. Okay. So now you've gotten a glimpse of what evidence-centered design on the ground in SRI actually looks like, what it's going, and we're trying to do it. But now we're going to do something a little bit special. I wanted you to see something of what the item development process itself looks like. So we have these design documents, and we've built some items. How do we know that those items are effective? How do we know that they work? And this is a big part of what you do in assessment. You have to think about the validation of the items. And I could not show you all the different kinds of validity studies that we do. But I took one that I think people enjoy seeing, and I thought we'll let you get a glimpse of it. This is Coffee Cup and Skater. And what you're going to actually see is a Cog Lab underway with a little girl, and she's going to be talking about how she solves these two test problems. And I want you to see it because you'll hear the individual, who happens to be her father, talking to her about what she's to do. She's to follow some directions. She's going to have to answer the questions and so on. And what's important about the Cog Lab? Why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it as a step to know whether these assessment items that we produced are really valuable. In other words, can the child understand the directions that they're hearing? Is there a capability on the part of the child to actually be able to use the tools? We want to know, on top of that, does the question actually elicit the construct or the content we're trying to measure? So I think we're ready to play this video. You'll see two items, and the important thing here is these are items also that are going to go into one of our workspaces. So you're seeing a glimpse inside a workspace as well.
Right now I'm thinking, what are you supposed to do? Because the cups look exactly the same. They're almost the same, except there's A, B, C, and D written on them. So let's see if I touch anything. No, that doesn't work. Maybe if I drag this. Oh, whoa, it moved. Okay, so the D cup has 90 written on it. So I'm assuming that's the hotness. Well, whatever you call it. And then C for 45 maybe? Yeah, around 45. So we can write that down. 90 and 45, something like that. So let's do B. 85. Okay. 85. Okay, last is A. So if it's below 90, D is the winner, I guess. 55. Okay. Nope. There. So D is the winner with 90. So
Okay.
The hottest coffee is D.
Thank you.
I'm thinking.
Why don't you now press the racetrack button right here and you'll move to the next problem.
Go.
So press go and read what it says.
Caitlin moves around the track at a constant speed. Use the stopwatch to time how long it takes her to go once around the track. Okay. So I'm just going to I'm thinking this is, I'm going to have to need a place to know when she does a full circle. So I'm thinking that I could maybe write a line here. So when she crosses the line, I start, and when she finishes, which means crosses the line again, I stop. So let's just reset this. Oops. Reset. Okay, so when she crosses the line, I'm going to start it and stop. So she takes 6 seconds and 93 milliseconds, I'm guessing, to go around the track.
Okay, so I have to tell you, I've watched audiences respond to this item any number of times, and I can always tell the scientists in the room, because when the child actually says, I'm going to put the line here to see where they start, I see all the heads nod in agreement, so I know we have some validity to this item. Okay, and the last slide I have is pictures of many of the members of our assessment team. I'm sure I didn't get all of them, but there are lots of people who have worked with us and made major contributions to the work that we do. This is probably the key slide in the whole deck, is right here with all that intellect and capability. It's really quite wonderful. But I want to give you one last thought here as we end. And that is, what was the driving mission behind all of this? And I want to put it in a little bigger frame for you. So we've been doing evidence-centered design for quite a while now. One of the most important things, and many of the people in this room are scientists who work and do empirical work. So let me just tell you that when you are doing your studies, all of you know that if you don't have a high-quality measurement instrument, whether you're assessing children or whether you're doing work in a laboratory, the quality of the findings that you're going to get are going to be in jeopardy. There's a threat to validity if you have poor instrumentation. And what was behind the work that we did right along has been, this is, again, guidance from Bob Mislevy, the importance of being able to actually develop high-quality instrumentation for individuals to use. So I'm hoping that if you are thinking about doing work in your lab, you'll remember that evidence-centered design would suggest that you need to go through this systematic, disciplined process to think about what you're actually measuring. Okay. Yes, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Bill. That's great. Great. Thank you. That's great. Okay. So, Jeremy, I'm going to go there.
Geneva, you definitely deserve the gold star now.